Are you looking for opportunities and positions where you can move out of clinical work? Today, we're going to talk about one of those non-clinical roles. It is being a director of advanced practice providers.
I'm Browne. I am a physician assistant. I've been practicing clinically for over 12 years.
Thanks for joining us today, Aaron. Welcome. What, in a nutshell, is this job?
I would say broadly, APP directors, executive directors oftentimes fill roles that are strategic in nature for the organization related to advanced practice. Often those roles have direct leadership responsibilities where they will have teams of APPs reporting up to them. And in other cases, they may have more focused roles, depending on the size of the organization, that are specific to maybe a domain or a service line or a large specialty that leads a large group of APPs within that.
So it sounds like the job is kind of defining our roles and helping APPs to work to the top of their license and to help other people in administration be more aware of what it is that we do.
I tend to look at my role as being someone who helps provide vision for advanced practice in the system. I also function in many ways as a primary resource related to APP recruitment, retention, scope of practice, utilization, practice models, credentialing, orientation, onboarding, and even competency and professional development.
Now, are you 100% non-clinical?
So in my role, I have about 90% of my time that is administrative, but I do keep clinical practice.
Is that common?
Of other leaders that I have had the opportunity to meet over the years, I would say the large majority of them do maintain some level of clinical practice. I do know of other leaders, though, that have stepped away.
Is this most often an NP role?
I've seen a healthy mix, but I have a suspicion that that's probably more recent. Just given the background of nursing and the experience that nursing has had in healthcare and health systems, I think they're a little better understood sometimes by hospital leadership. Not to say that I think one is better prepared than the other. I don't. And I really do think that effective leaders need to understand the practice of both.
Do you actually do the hiring and the firing of the advanced practice providers?
So for the employment home where I am employed, I do have direct reporting of all of the advanced practice providers up through my leadership group. That said, I've got a wonderful team of advanced practice leaders that for the most part in their areas are responsible for hiring and firing decisions.
Okay.
I am responsible for obviously the hiring and termination of my particular direct reports.
What kind of hours are you working?
I would love to tell you that I have a typical day. I will say this, I spend a fair amount of time meeting with other organizational leaders, meeting with my team, trying to get out and spend a little time meeting with people on the front lines as well. I spend a fair amount of time reading and reviewing documents that are relevant to the work that we're doing. I'd say the benefit of my role is I am very much responsible for setting my schedule. And so I make sure to set aside time in the week to do things that are important to being a good leader.
And do you work from home sometimes? Are you always in the office?
I do work from home occasionally, but I also do try and get in because there's only so much that you can do sometimes from home. I try and get into the office regularly to make sure that I'm able to get into the hospitals or the clinics, do a little rounding and spend a little bit of time at the front line.
So these roles tend to be comparable to PA salaries?
I think in general, most people would expect that when you are in a leadership role, that you would have some level of increased compensation. I think that as the professions begin to become more mature and we have more leadership opportunities, there's more and more data to help health systems drive how we compensate.
If you're working in an organization that has unrealistic ideas of what adequate or fair compensation can be, do you get to advocate for things like that? Do you get to advocate for, look, they can't see 28 patients in a day. Do you get to affect change in those kind of areas?
So historically, physicians have led physicians. Nurses have led nurses, but over the years, as the PA and APRN professions have developed, that opportunity was not always there. And I think that what you've seen in organizations is then a wide variety, right, of what practice might develop like and how it's utilized, how it's compensated, and so on. So I think having representation at the senior leadership table helps to create some of that visibility and recognition. As far as individual areas, right, compensation, practice models, care design, quality, you name it. There's a variety of things that leaders have the opportunity to impact. I think that's going to largely depend on the scope and the organization. I think one key role of a leader is to advocate for your teams, right? I think that's a really important aspect. But I think one of the other key roles of a leader is being able to help share the vision both up and down
Right.
the leadership structure, right? So I think it's important for the front line to know that there are things that as an APP leader, you're also doing and advocating for that do impact the work, and then to be able to help communicate and explain why that's important. I think at the end of the day, people are trying to do the right thing. Administrators are trying to make sure that the practices are viable and able to continue delivering on the very important mission of what each specialty area needs to do. And providers, physicians, APPs, we're trying to do the very best we can for our patients and at the same time not burn out, because that's, again, a very real thing. And how do we meet in the middle?
Do you feel like that is something that upper management really realizes, how stressed out and burned out people are and the mass exodus that's happening in healthcare?
When we've seen people leave healthcare over the years before in challenging times as it relates to the economy and so on, but this definitely does feel substantially different. There's constant discussions on ways that we can try and help combat that. Our organization is taking a very critical look at that and trying to think about it. I don't know, and I would say this is true of our organization and in others, I don't know that people on the front lines necessarily always know that. And how you communicate that effectively to people on the front lines is important. The more we continue to focus on that to let people know that they are heard, that we do understand, and that changes are attempting to be made, I think that's helpful. But I also can appreciate, having been on the front lines, that sometimes it feels like the people that are at the top may not necessarily have that perspective.
So what kind of experience, training, certifications, whatever, do people normally have to be able to move into these APP director roles?
I think there's the formal and the informal. Some people choose to go on and pursue advanced degrees, right? So after becoming a PA or APRN, they'll go back and get their MBA or their MHA or some other degree. And I think those do help. I don't necessarily think that's the standard or requirement yet. Not to say that it won't be. And I think, as with any profession, as it develops and advances, there's maybe more of an expectation. In as much as people spend time taking the opportunity to learn key facets that will help you develop as a leader, I think you can, right? And there's so many resources out there available. There's certificate courses, there's online learning. There's a lot of opportunities to pick up that information. I think anything that you learn around the operations of healthcare, I think anything you learn about leadership techniques, improving the ability to communicate, and hosting effective, difficult conversations. I think learning how to effectively negotiate is a really incredible skill. And even just some basic finance understanding, because as you move up, the probability that you're going to eventually have to manage, or at the very least understand, a budget is real. And the beauty of it is you can do some of that before you even step into a leadership role. If you think about it, most of our professional organizations, my state academy, the national academies, they all have budgets that they work with, right? And they always need a treasurer, someone who's going to help step up and learn. So there are ways to get some of that experience, OJT, if you will, that I think really help. When we look at productivity, right, there are large changes coming from our national payers that are going to significantly impact the landscape of physician and APP compensation as it relates to productivity and billing. So having an understanding of that and learning more about that is also incredibly important. So I think there's a variety of things that you can learn and pick up without necessarily having to do it. And I think the other thing is that sometimes people grow and develop through tiered steps, right? So sometimes people become an informal leader of their group, and then move into maybe a more formalized supervisor role. That might turn into something more where they're leading a larger group of individuals. So over time, they learn and develop in the role, which I think can also be done. So the beauty of our profession right now is I think that there's not a clear definition of what you need to have. But I do think carving out those skills that you may have deficiencies in really do help you prepare for some of these jobs.
Are there conferences and organizations and societies and things for directors?
Anyone who's interested in leadership, I think there are a couple great conferences out there. And by no means am I promoting one or the other. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples of ones that I'm aware of. So the AAPA does host an executive leadership conference annually. That is just a fantastic wealth of information regarding all things leadership. There's also another conference out there that's called the Advanced Practice Provider Leadership Conference. And that is another good conference. Their focus is broadly on APPs. I will tell you that both conferences are open to PAs and APRNs and have educational credits available for both.
How many years of clinical experience do people really have to have?
I look to physicians in this particular case, right? There are physicians that come directly out of residency and move into medical directorship role. I think from that perspective, all of us, all APRNs and PAs in our training, we are trained and developed to be leaders of our teams and our patients, right? And so I think that is a really important recognition for us to have, is that we've all already developed some of these key skills. So we all know that in your first couple of years in any given specialty in which you practice, there's a steep learning curve, right? To come into that and to try and pick up that learning curve at the same time as trying to lead others within that, that would be challenging. So I mean, at a minimum, I would say that you probably want a couple of years of practice.
What do you like most about the job?
I love the challenges that this role brings. It's something different every day. There's always unique needs. There's always a problem that needs to be, investigated or resolved. I love the ability to speak for our diverse group of professionals. It's just such an honor.
So what are some of the things that you think people would like least about the job?
One of the things I always appreciated about my practice in emergency medicine is it was shift-based. I would go to work, I would do my work, I would finish up my work, I would go home, and I wouldn't think about work again until I came back, right? Unless I had a really rough case. Whereas with my current role, it's an always on sort of thing. And not to say that you can't create professional boundaries within that, because you certainly can. But I am essentially reachable by most people in my organization at any time if something comes up that's needed. And so to always feel like you're on can be challenging. I think the other thing is it's often surprising to people when you're working with a group of professionals that are highly educated that you would expect that there would be a degree of self-sufficiency, which is often not present. And so that can sometimes be challenging for people to kind of have your eyes open to what you would think would be something that would be very much a very simple matter of professionalism, and you're having to address those sort of issues with people.
Do you find that these jobs have a lot of competition and are very difficult to get?
I do think that there are likely a large number of candidates for position. I think the more mobile someone is, the easier they will have a time of finding an opportunity, right? I think at the higher level, it really does come down to experience. And I would say probably the other biggest barrier as far as competition is that these roles typically are viewed as being beneficial to have someone hired from within. One of the things you look for in any of your teams are people who are willing to come to the table and help identify solutions. Being that person that you identify problems and start to understand who are kind of the key stakeholders to help enact that change. What are the steps that need to be taken? Not to say that you have to do it all, but start to help create solutions. That's what leaders are looking for. And that's how you create opportunities. Because when they find someone like that, they're then more likely to come back to that person when something else comes up.
Any last thoughts?
Leading people is challenging, but I think it can be incredibly rewarding. One of the great things about being a PA or an APRN or a physician is that ability to directly impact a patient's life, right? Or their family, or their experiences. When you work in a role where you are beginning to empower and enable those frontline physicians and APPs, you have now started to directly impact multiple patients' lives and multiple families' experiences and so on. And so I think that is a really unique feature of what we do.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you so much, and appreciate the work you're doing. This is fantastic.
If you are looking for other non-clinical roles, you can check out these videos here.